Hi, I'm Maya. For 5 years, I lived in the shadow of a man who promised to love me, but only knew how to control me. When I finally escaped, he hunted me across 3 states, determined to drag me back into his darkness. Yesterday, he found me at my art gallery opening, expecting to see the broken woman he once terrorized. But when I turned around, surrounded by my success and the man who taught me what real love feels like, his face went completely white. You ever wondered what it's like to become exactly who you needed when you were suffering? Stick around. What happened next? No one saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood there in my carefully selected black dress, the one with the subtle geometric patterns that reminded me of constellations, small points of light against the darkness. My hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, not a strand out of place. Control in the details, that's what Dr. Lambert had taught me during our therapy sessions. When everything feels like it's spiraling, control what you can. So I controlled my appearance, my breathing, the precise way I arranged the champagne flutes on the silver trays. The gallery walls gleamed white under the strategic lighting I'd spent weeks perfecting. Each painting hung at exactly the same height, creating a horizon line that wrapped around the entire space. My work, my actual work, not the person I pretended to be for all those years, displayed for everyone to see. Vulnerable, exposed, powerful. I hadn't planned for this night to be anything other than a professional triumph. 6 years of rebuilding myself from the ground up, 3 years of painting in a tiny studio apartment where the bathroom doubled as my supply closet. And now here I was, Maya Winters, featured artist at the Callaway Gallery in downtown Portland. Not Maya Chen, the ghost of a woman who once flinched at the sound of keys in the door. Not Maya, the girl who learned to anticipate mood swings by the cadence of footsteps in the hallway. You need anything else before we open the doors? Julian appeared beside me, his voice low and steady. That was the thing about Julian. He never startled me. He always made sure I saw him coming, a kindness I never had to explain to him. I'm good, I said, though my hands trembled slightly as I adjusted a flute that was already perfectly aligned with the others. Just normal jitters. He placed his hand near mine on the table, not touching but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. You've earned this moment, every single second of it. The gallery assistant, Zoe, a college student with blue-tipped hair and eyes that missed nothing, approached with a clipboard. We've got a line forming outside. Looks like your social media campaign worked. You ready to let them in? I nodded, taking one final deep breath. This was it, the culmination of everything I'd rebuilt from the ashes of my former life. The triumph that nobody, especially not him, ever thought I was capable of achieving. The doors opened, and people streamed in. Art lovers, collectors, curious locals who'd seen the write-up in the Portland Tribune. They moved between my paintings like water finding its way around stones, pausing, observing, some tilting their heads as if changing perspective might reveal something new. I watched them from near the refreshment table, not yet ready to circulate. Julian stood nearby, chatting with the gallery owner, but keeping me in his peripheral vision. Your use of negative space is revolutionary. A woman in a burgundy pantsuit told me, gesturing toward the largest canvas in the collection. The absence speaks volumes. If only she knew how much of my life had been defined by absence. The absence of autonomy. The absence of safety. The absence of self. I smiled and thanked her, explaining the technique without revealing the trauma that inspired it. That was the beautiful secret of art. You could transmute your pain into something people would pay thousands of dollars to hang in their dining rooms. An hour into the opening, I was starting to relax. The champagne had taken the edge off my anxiety, and the overwhelmingly positive reception was better validation than any therapy session. I was engaged in a conversation with a local arts reporter when I felt it, that familiar prickle at the back of my neck, the sixth sense that had kept me alive all those years. I turned, scanning the crowd, and that's when I saw him. Standing just inside the entrance, a glass of champagne in his hand that I knew he wouldn't drink. Derek hated champagne. He called it pretentious piss. He was wearing a charcoal suit that hung perfectly on his frame, his dark hair shorter than when I'd last seen him, but still thick, his jawline perhaps a bit softer with age but still strong, handsome in that conventional way that had initially blinded me to all the red flags. Our eyes met across the crowded gallery, and for a moment, I was 23 again, trapped in that apartment in Chicago, wondering if tonight would be a good night or if I'd say the wrong thing and set him off. My breath caught, and I felt my chest tighten. But then something extraordinary happened. I didn't collapse inward. I didn't look away. I held his gaze, steadily, and I realized with a jolt of surprise that I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, not even hatred. Just a dull recognition, like spotting a car you used to own being driven by someone else. He began moving toward me, weaving through the crowd with that purposeful stride I remembered so well. Julian noticed immediately. Of course he did. He was always attuned to shifts in my energy. He didn't rush over protectively or make a scene. He simply repositioned himself, casually moving closer while continuing his conversation with a collector. "Maya," Derek said when he reached me, my name in his mouth sounding like something that belonged to him. "You look different." Preparing. And narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 5 years since I'd heard that voice, and still my body remembered it on a cellular level. But my mind was stronger now. "Derek," I said, my voice steady, "I wasn't expecting to see you here." He smiled. That charismatic smile that once made me feel like the only woman in the world, and later became the warning sign that preceded the worst nights of my life. "I saw the article about your opening. Portland Monthly, was it? I was in Seattle. For business and thought, how could I miss Maya's big night? Translation: I've been tracking your movements, and I want you to know it." "How thoughtful," I said, taking a deliberate sip of my champagne. "Are you enjoying the exhibition?" His eyes flicked to the massive canvas behind me, a fractured, female form emerging from shattered glass, the pieces reassembling in a new configuration. Not broken, just transformed. "It's intense," he said, his smile tightening slightly. "Not really the pretty landscapes you used to paint." "I evolved," I replied simply. The reporter beside me sensed the tension and politely excused herself, leaving me alone with the man who once told me I'd never amount to anything without him. "You've done well for yourself," Derek continued, gesturing around the gallery. "I always told you that you had potential if you'd just apply yourself." The revision of history, another one of his specialties. In reality, he'd discouraged my art, called it a hobby, suggested I focus on supporting his career instead. "How have you been?" I asked, not because I cared, but because I knew it would irritate him that I wasn't asking anything specific about his life, his accomplishments, his status. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Busy. The firm made me partner last year. I bought that lake house we always talked about." The "we" landed like a stone dropped in still water. There was no "we" anymore, hadn't been for years, but in his mind, perhaps there still was. "Congratulations," I said, and meant it. Let him have the partnership, the lake house, whatever material success he'd achieved. I had something far more valuable, myself, whole and uncompromised. "You should see it sometime," he continued, leaning slightly closer. It has that studio space you always wanted, north-facing windows, perfect light. And there it was, the bait, dangled so carefully. The promise that this time would be different. This time he'd support my dreams. This time he wouldn't slowly crush me into nothingness. 5 years ago, I might have hesitated. 3 years ago, I might have felt a pull. But now, I just felt sorry for him, still using the same playbook, unaware that I was reading from an entirely different script. That sounds lovely, but I have my own studio now, I said, and my own life. His expression hardened for a fraction of a second before he recovered. Of course. I just thought it would be nice to catch up properly. For old time's sake. Old times. The phrase hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken memories. The old times where he controlled my friendships. The old times where he checked my phone while I showered. The old times where I learned to sleep with one eye open. Maya, there you are. Julian's voice was warm as he approached, carrying 2 fresh glasses of champagne. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine in that deliberate way he had, present but never possessive. Sorry to interrupt. Not at all, I said, relief flooding through me even though I hadn't felt truly threatened. Julian, this is Derek, an old acquaintance. Derek, this is Julian. I offered no further explanation of Julian's role in my life. Let Derek wonder. Nice to meet you, Julian said, extending his hand with a smile that appeared genuine, unless you noticed the coolness in his eyes. Julian knew everything, every sordid detail of my history with Derek. He'd held me through nightmares and panic, attacks. He'd helped me change the locks when I became convinced Derek had found my address in Seattle. Derek shook Julian's hand, his grip visibly tightening. Likewise, Maya and I go way back. So I've heard, Julian replied, his tone pleasant but firm. An awkward silence settled over us, the kind that Derek would have once filled with charming conversation, making me appear antisocial by comparison. But I wasn't that person anymore. I should circulate, I said. There are some collectors I need to speak with. It was unexpected to see you, Derek. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He wasn't used to me ending conversations. We should have dinner while I'm in town, to properly catch up. Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. A woman with a large bouquet of lilies, my favorite, though few people knew that, was scanning the room, clearly looking for someone. Excuse me, I said, stepping away from Derek and Julian toward the woman. As I approached, she smiled broadly. Ms. Winters, these are for you. Congratulations on your opening night. She handed me the elaborate arrangement, white lilies interspersed with sprigs of lavender, a combination I'd once mentioned to Julian in passing. I glanced at the card nestled among the flowers. To new beginnings and quiet victories. All my love, Jay. When I looked up, Julian was still standing with Derek, maintaining polite conversation. But his eyes met mine across the room, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a small, private smile. The significance wasn't lost on me, or on Derek, who was watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. In our relationship, flowers had been weapons, not gifts. They arrived after the worst fights, accompanied by tearful apologies and promises to change. They were never about celebrating me, only about absolving him. Your boyfriend? Derek asked when I returned, nodding toward Julian, who had stepped away to speak with the gallery owner. Partner, I corrected, setting the flowers on a nearby table. In every sense that matters. Derek's expression darkened momentarily before he forced another smile. Well, he seems nice, different from your usual type. My usual type. As if I'd had a parade of men before or after him. As if he hadn't been the one to isolate me until he was my entire world. He is different, I agreed. That's rather the point. The gallery was getting crowded now, the success of the opening evident in the density of bodies and the increasing volume of conversation. Several red sold dots had appeared beside paintings, including the largest piece, the fractured woman, reforming herself. Looks like you're doing well commercially, too, Derek observed, his tone suggesting surprise. I remember when you were too shy to even show your work to my friends. Too shy. Not too intimidated by your criticism, or too afraid of your reaction if someone else praised my talent. Things change, I said simply. People change. Do they? He asked, his voice dropping to that intimate register he used to use when we were alone, the one that could be either seductive or terrifying depending on his mood. I'm not so sure. I think at our core, we stay the same. You're still the same. Maya I knew, just with a better haircut and some fancy friends. And there it was, the negging, the subtle undermining, the attempt to make me question my transformation. Classic Derek. You're entitled to your opinion, I replied, my voice steady. But you're wrong. I'm not the same person you knew. That person doesn't exist anymore. His smile faltered, then returned with a harder edge. Come on, Maya. You and I both know what you're really like when the lights go down and the audience goes home. This whole independent artist persona is impressive. I'll give you that. But we both know who you really are. 5 years ago, those words would have devastated me, made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Now they just sounded desperate. I think you should leave, I said quietly. His eyebrows shot up in exaggerated surprise. Leave? I just got here, and I came all this way to support you. No, I corrected him. You came all this way to remind me that you can find me whenever you want, to see if I'm still the person you could control. I'm not. So there's really no reason for you to stay. Derek's facade slipped then, just for a moment, his expression contorting into something ugly and familiar before he recovered. You always did have an active imagination. That's what makes you an artist, I suppose. I'm just here as an old friend, supporting your work. We were never friends, Derek, I said, the truth of it washing through me like a cleansing wave. And I don't need your support, not anymore. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Be careful, Maya. You might have these people fooled with your reinvention, but remember, I know all your weaknesses. I know what you're afraid of. I know what keeps you up at night. Once, those words would have paralyzed me with fear. Now, they just confirmed what I already knew, that he hadn't changed at all. That's where you're wrong, I replied, matching his quiet tone. You knew the old Maya's fears, but you have no idea what the woman standing in front of you now is capable of. I held his gaze steadily, unflinchingly, until he was the one who looked away. Enjoy your little victory tonight, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. But this conversation isn't over. We have unfinished business, you and I. No, I said with finality. We don't. Goodbye, Derek. I turned and walked away from him, moving through my gallery opening with practiced poise, stopping to chat with guests, accepting congratulations, discussing my technique with interested collectors. I didn't look back to see if he was watching me. I didn't need to. I could feel his eyes on me, that familiar prickling sensation between my shoulder blades. But unlike before, it didn't make me hunch my shoulders or make myself smaller. Instead, I stood taller, laughed more genuinely, existed more fully in my body and my space. The space I had created for myself, both literally in this gallery and figuratively in my reconstructed life. When I finally did glance toward where I'd left, he was gone. The only evidence he'd been there at all was a champagne flute on a side table, still full. Julian found me later, as the crowd was beginning to thin. He didn't ask about Derek, didn't mention the tension he'd undoubtedly felt. He simply slid his arm around my waist. A question, not a claim. And when I leaned into him, he pressed a kiss to my temple. "You were magnificent tonight," he said. I smiled up at him. This man who had never once made me afraid, who had shown me what safety actually felt like. The exhibition was a success. "I wasn't talking about the sales," he clarified, though those were impressive too. I knew what he meant. He had witnessed my confrontation with Derek from across the room, had recognized the significance of that exchange without needing to hear the words. As we locked up the gallery later that night, I paused at the threshold, looking back at my paintings illuminated by the security lights. Each canvas represented a piece of my journey, from broken to whole, from terrified to brave, from victim to creator. "You okay?" Julian asked, his hand warm against the small of my back. "Yes," I said, and meant it completely. "I really am." Outside, the Portland night was cool and damp, the streets glistening under the streetlights. We walked hand in hand toward our car, and I didn't check over my shoulder once. I didn't scan for familiar silhouettes or listen for footsteps behind us. For the first time in years, I felt truly free of the shadow that had followed me across state lines and through countless sleepless nights. Derek had found me, just as I'd always feared he would. But when he didn't find the frightened girl he'd terrorized in Chicago. He found a woman who had rebuilt herself from the foundation up, who had reclaimed her voice and her power, who stood surrounded by the physical manifestations of her healing journey. He'd come looking for a ghost, but instead, he'd found me, solid, present, and completely beyond his reach. As Julian and I drove home through the quiet streets, I rolled down my window and let the cool night air rush over my face. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with the scent of rain-washed concrete and distant pine. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and silver, beautiful in their imperfection. For so long I'd lived in fear of this very night, the night Derek would inevitably find me. I'd played it out in my mind 1,000 different ways, most of them ending with me retreating back into the shell of myself I'd worked so hard to break free from. But the reality had been entirely different. When faced with my past, I hadn't crumbled. I hadn't disappeared. I had stood my ground, spoken my truth, and walked away intact. More than intact, triumphant. The woman I had become was so much stronger than the woman I'd been forced to be. And that perhaps was the greatest masterpiece I'd ever created. I never imagined I'd be someone worth stalking. That's what kept running through my mind as I stepped out of the gallery and into the cool Portland evening, Julian's hand steady against the small of my back. 5 years earlier, I would have been checking every shadow, jumping at every sound, convinced that Derek was lurking around every corner. But tonight, I felt strangely calm. Maybe it was the triumph of the exhibition, or maybe it was finally facing the monster who had once controlled every aspect of my existence. Either way, I slept soundly that night, wrapped in Julian's arms, without a single nightmare. I wish I could say that's where the story ends, with me triumphant, Derek defeated, slinking away into the darkness never to be seen again. But life isn't a fairy tale, and monsters don't disappear just because you've learned not to fear them. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 days after the gallery opening, when my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Beautiful. Exhibition. You've always had talent when properly motivated. We should talk about your future. Coffee tomorrow?" I stared at the screen, my coffee mug suspended halfway to my lips. The studio apartment I used as my workspace was filled with morning light, making everything appear softer, safer than it actually was. I knew immediately who the text was from. No one else could pack so much condescension into so few words. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked the number and continued working on the commission piece I'd started the day before. A triptych for a local tech company's headquarters. 3 panels showing transformation, from chaos to order, darkness to light. My specialty. An hour later, my email pinged. From Derek, Lansing Wharton Partners. Com. Subject, catching up Maya. I see you've changed your number. Smart move. I always told you to be more cautious about personal security. It seems you're finally taking my advice. I'm in Portland until Sunday. I think we should talk. There are things you should know, things I need to say to you face to face. I'm staying at the Sentinel. Room 712. I've enclosed my private number, since you seem to have lost it. I closed the email without responding and turned back to my painting. The red I was using suddenly seemed too violent, too reminiscent of the anger I'd spent years learning to channel into something constructive. I wiped my brush clean and switched to a deep indigo instead. By Friday, the calls started. First to my business line, which went to voicemail, then to the gallery, where Zoe fielded them with increasing concern. There's a man who keeps calling, she told me when I arrived to check on a new installation. He says he's an old collector of yours, but he gives me the creeps. Keeps asking about your schedule, when you'll be in next. I sighed, setting down my portfolio on the counter. Tall, dark hair, expensive suit, charming in an aggressive way. Her eyes widened. You know him? Unfortunately. I rubbed my temples, feeling the first twinges of a stress headache forming. If he calls again, just tell him I'm unavailable indefinitely. Don't give him any information about me. That night, Julian found me in our living room staring at my laptop screen. I'd finally given in to curiosity and searched for Derek online. His firm's website showed him looking powerful and confident, a senior partner specializing in corporate acquisitions. There were photos of him at charity galas, professional headshots where he gazed authoritatively into the camera, even a video of him speaking at a business conference about aggressive growth strategies. You okay? Julian asked, placing a mug of chamomile tea beside me. I nodded, closing the laptop. Just doing some reconnaissance. He sat beside me on the couch, not touching me until I leaned into him, seeking his warmth. You don't owe him your attention, Maya. Not a second of it. I know, I said, but ignoring him never worked before. He just escalates until he gets what he wants. Julian was quiet for a moment, his hand tracing gentle patterns on my shoulder. What do you want to do? That was what I loved most about him. He never told me how to handle my trauma. He just supported whatever decision I made. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm not hiding from him. I'm not changing my routine or canceling appointments. I refuse to let him disrupt my life again. The next morning, I opened the gallery myself, giving Zoe the day off. The weekend crowd was light but steady, mostly tourists and a few serious collectors who'd heard about the opening. I was explaining my use of negative space to an elderly couple when the door chimed, and Derek walked in. He looked exactly as he had at the opening. Expensive suit, confident stride, that smile that once made my heart race with both desire and fear. Now it just made me tired. Maya, he said, approaching as the couple moved on to the next painting. You're a hard woman to reach these days. I met his gaze steadily. Not hard, selective. He chuckled as if I'd said something charming. Fair enough. You're busy, successful. I respect that. I doubted he respected anything about my new life, but I didn't say so. What do you want, Derek? You've been calling the gallery, texting, emailing. Why? His smile faltered slightly. I told you. I want to talk. Properly talk. Not in the middle of your exhibition with 100 people around. We have nothing to talk about, I said, keeping my voice level even as my pulse quickened. Our relationship ended 5 years ago. Did it? He asked, stepping closer. Because from where I'm standing, you're still running from me, still looking over your shoulder, still defining yourself in opposition to me. The audacity of his statement momentarily stunned me. I'd spent years in therapy working to define myself on my own terms, not in relation to him or the trauma he'd inflicted. "I'm not running from anything," I said finally. "I moved on, built a new life. The fact that you tracked me down after all this time only proves which one of us is stuck in the past." His jaw tightened, but his voice remained smooth. "I didn't track you down, Maya. I saw your exhibition mentioned in an art magazine and recognized your work. Your style is distinctive." The implication being that I hadn't changed as much as I thought, that he could still recognize parts of me, still had some claim to knowing who I was. "What do you really want?" I asked, again crossing my arms. "Because I don't believe for a second this is about supporting my career or catching up like old friends." For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw a flash of the real Derek, the one who'd thrown my phone against the wall when a male classmate texted me about an assignment, the one who'd isolated me from my friends and family until he was my entire world. "Fine," he said, his voice lower, harder. "I want to understand how you could just walk away. 5 years, Maya. 5 years without a word, without even a goodbye. I deserved better than that." I almost laughed at the irony. Deserved better? After what you did to me? He had the audacity to look confused. "What I did? I loved you. I supported you when no one else believed in your art. I was building a future for us." The revisionist history was so blatant, it was almost impressive. In his mind, he had been the hero of our story, not the villain. "You controlled me," I corrected him. "You isolated me from everyone who cared about me. You made me doubt my own perceptions until I didn't know what was real anymore. That's not love, Derek. That's abuse." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. I'd never said it to his face before. In the early days after I left, I couldn't even say it to myself. "Abuse?" he repeated, his expression hardening. "Is that what your new boyfriend told you? What? Did you meet in some support group? Did he convince you that you were some kind of victim?" I shook my head, refusing to let him reframe my healing as someone else's influence. "No, I figured it out on my own. It took time and distance and a lot of therapy, but eventually, I saw our relationship for what it really was." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that used to make me flinch. "And what was it, Maya? Tell me. What was so terrible about being with someone who wanted to protect you? Who saw your potential when you couldn't see it yourself?" I held my ground, though everything in me wanted to step back, to create distance. "You didn't protect me. You controlled me. There's a difference." "I kept you safe," he insisted. "From what?" I challenged. "From having friends? From pursuing my career? From making my own decisions?" His eyes narrowed. "From making mistakes. From people who would use you and discard you. From your own naivety." I shook my head, a sad laugh escaping me. "The only person who used me was you, Derek. You used my insecurities to make me dependent on you. You used my love as a weapon against me. You used my fear to keep me in line." For a moment, he looked genuinely confused, as if he couldn't reconcile my version of events with his own. It occurred to me then that perhaps he truly didn't see his behavior as abusive, that in his mind, he had been the protective boyfriend, the guiding hand, the voice of reason. "That's not how it was," he said finally, his voice softer now, almost wounded. "We were happy, Maya. At least at the beginning. You can't rewrite our entire history." "No," I agreed. "I can't. There were good moments. That's what made it so confusing, so hard to leave. If it had been all bad all the time, I would have left sooner." He seized on this admission. Exactly. We had something real. Something worth salvaging. I shook my head. No, Derek. We had something toxic disguised as love. And it took me years to undo the damage. His expression hardened again. Damage. Right. Look at you now. Successful artist, fancy gallery, new boyfriend. You seem really damaged. The sarcasm was cutting, but I refused to let it wound me. The fact that I rebuilt my life doesn't erase what you did. It just proves that I was stronger than you thought. He stepped closer, and this time I did step back, maintaining the distance between us. His eyes tracked the movement, and a small, satisfied smile played at the corners of his mouth. Still afraid of me, he observed. After all this time. Not afraid, I corrected. Cautious. There's a difference. Is there? He challenged. Then have dinner with me tonight. Just dinner, in a public place of your choosing. If you're not afraid, prove it. It was such a transparent manipulation that I almost laughed. The old Derek, using the same tired tactics. Questioning my courage, challenging me to prove myself, knowing that once I was alone with him, he could start the process of breaking down my defenses. I don't need to prove anything to you, I said. I don't owe you dinner or conversation or anything else. His jaw tightened. After 5 years, you owe me at least an explanation face to face, not in your gallery where you can hide behind your artwork and your professional persona. I'm not hiding behind anything, I said. This is who I am now. If you can't see that, it's because you don't want to. The Maya I knew would never have walked away without a word, he said, his voice taking on that wounded quality that used to make me feel guilty and small. She would have had the courage to face me, to explain why she was leaving. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The Maya you knew was afraid of your reaction, afraid of what you might do if she tried to leave openly. That's why she disappeared. In the middle of the night while you were on a business trip. That's why she changed her number and moved to a different state, because she knew you wouldn't let her go without a fight. His expression darkened. So you were a coward? No, I said quietly. I was a survivor doing what I needed to do to escape. There's a difference. For a moment we stood in silence, the weight of our shared history pressing down between us. Then the gallery door chimed again as a group of tourists entered, breaking the tension. Derek glanced at them, then back at me. This conversation isn't over, Maya. Yes, I said firmly. It is. I turned away from him, moving to greet the new visitors with a professional smile that betrayed none of the turmoil I felt inside. I didn't watch Derek leave, but I heard the door close behind him with a finality that should have been reassuring. Instead, a chill ran down my spine. Because I knew Derek. And Derek never accepted no for an answer. That night, I told Julian everything about Derek's visit to the gallery, his attempts to rewrite our history, his demand for dinner and explanation. I'm worried, I admitted as we sat on our small balcony, the lights of downtown Portland twinkling below us. He's not going to just go away. Julian was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than afraid. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He never panicked, never reacted with the hot, impulsive anger that had characterized so many of my interactions with Derek. What do you think he really wants? Julian asked finally. I wrapped my hands around my mug of tea, drawing comfort from its warmth. Control. He always needed to be in control. When I left, I took that away from him. I don't think he ever got over it. And now? I sighed. Now he's trying to reestablish it. Get me to doubt my memories, my perception of what our relationship was. Classic gaslighting. Julian nodded. So what do you want to do? Again, that question. Not telling me what to do, not insisting on protecting me, just asking what I wanted and preparing to support my decision. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to just ignore him until he leaves town. Another part thinks that will just make him escalate. What would Dr. Lambert say? Julian asked, referencing my therapist. I smiled faintly. She'd say, I should maintain my boundaries and not engage with my abuser. Sound advice, Julian observed. But she's never met Derek, I countered. She doesn't know how persistent he can be. We fell silent, watching the city below. Finally, Julian spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. Maya, I need you to know something. Whatever you decide to do, I support you. But I also need you to be safe. If you think he might be dangerous, I don't think he would hurt me physically, I interrupted. That was never his style. He's more subtle than that. Julian nodded, but his expression remained concerned. Emotional violence is still violence. I reached for his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. I know, and I'm not planning to let him back into my life in any capacity. I just need to figure out how to make him understand that it's really over. But as I said the words, I wondered if that was even possible. Derek had spent 5 years tracking me down. He wasn't going to accept rejection easily. The next morning, a delivery arrived at the gallery, a massive arrangement of red roses, at least 3 dozen, in a crystal vase that probably cost more than most of the smaller paintings in my exhibition. The card read simply, Remember our first apartment? The way the light hit your face in the morning? I do. D. I stared at the flowers, my stomach churning. Our first apartment in Chicago had been a tiny studio with eastern exposure. The morning light had been beautiful, that much was true. What the card didn't mention was how Derek had insisted on picking that apartment because it was far from campus, isolated from my friends, and had security doors that required a key to exit as well as enter, for safety, he'd claimed. Zoe watched, me warily from behind the reception desk. Should I put them somewhere? No, I said firmly. Call the florist and have them picked up. I don't want them. She nodded, relief evident in her expression. Consider it done. But the flowers were just the beginning. Over the next 3 days, Derek launched a campaign that could only be described as psychological warfare disguised as romance. First came the emails, long, emotional missives recounting the early days of our relationship, carefully edited to exclude the control, the isolation, the fear. Then a package arrived at my studio, a leather-bound sketchbook identical to the one he'd given me for my 22nd birthday, the one I'd left behind when I fled Chicago. Inside was a handwritten note to new beginnings and old promises. Then came the voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. Maya, please, just talk to me. One dinner, that's all I'm asking. You can't just erase 5 years of history. We meant something to each other. I'm not leaving Portland until we talk. You know how persistent I can be. That last one sent a chill through me. Yes, I knew exactly how persistent Derek could be. It was why I'd changed my name, moved across the country, and spent years looking over my shoulder. By the 4th day, I'd had enough. The constant barrage was affecting my work, my sleep, my peace of mind. I found myself jumping at unexpected sounds, checking the locks twice before bed, scanning crowds for his face whenever I went out. I was slipping back into old patterns of hypervigilance, and I refused to let him do that to me again. So I made a decision. I would meet him one last time in a public place, with Julian nearby, but not at the table. I would say my piece, make it clear that there was no possibility of reconciliation or even friendship, and then I would walk away. Definitively. I texted the number he'd been calling from. 1 coffee. Tomorrow 2 p.m. Powell's Coffee Room. 30 minutes, no more. This is the only chance you get. His reply came almost instantly. I'll be there. Thank you, Maya. as if I were doing him a favor instead of trying to exorcise him from my life once and for all. I arrived at Powell's coffee room 20 minutes early, a deliberate choice that allowed me to select the perfect table, one near the exit, but not too close to the windows, with clear sight lines to all entrances. Old habits resurfacing. Julian had taken a position at a table across the room, pretending to read a book on architectural photography while actually keeping watch. We hadn't planned for him to intervene unless necessary, but his presence was a comfort I couldn't bring myself to refuse. The coffee shop was busy with the afternoon crowd, tourists browsing with paper cups in hand, students hunched over laptops, locals catching up over pastries. The constant hum of conversation and the rich scent of coffee created a comforting backdrop of normalcy, a public shield against whatever Derek might try. I ordered a black coffee, no sugar, a small act of reclamation. During our relationship, Derek had insisted I take it with cream and sugar, claiming black coffee was trying too hard to be masculine. One of countless small ways he'd controlled even the most insignificant aspects of my existence. At exactly 1:55 p.m., Derek walked in. Of course he was early. He'd always considered punctuality a virtue bordering on obsession. He spotted me immediately, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle despite the distance between us. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, his dark hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating the confident authority that had once seemed so attractive and later so terrifying. He ordered at the counter, then approached my table with 2 drinks, my black coffee already half consumed, and what looked like a cappuccino for himself. "You started without me," he observed, sliding into the seat across from me. His tone was light, but I caught the edge of criticism beneath the surface. "I was thirsty," I replied simply, refusing to apologize for such a trivial thing. Another small reclamation. He smiled, that practiced expression that never quite reached his eyes. "You look well, Maya. Portland agrees with you." "Freedom agrees with me," I corrected. His smile tightened fractionally. "Is that what you call it? Freedom?" "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what I call it." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of 5 years hanging between us like an invisible curtain. I could feel Julian's watchful presence across the room, a safety net I hoped I wouldn't need. "I got your flowers," I said finally, "and your emails, and your voicemails." "But you didn't respond," Derek noted, a hint of that old, dangerous quietness in his voice. "No," I agreed. "I didn't." "Why not?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "I was trying to remind you of the good times, of what we had together." I took a deliberate sip of my coffee, buying myself a moment to steady my voice. "That's not what we're here to discuss, Derek. We're here so I can make something absolutely clear to you. Our relationship is over. It's been over for 5 years. Nothing you say or do will change that." His expression hardened, then smoothed out into something more controlled. "You always were direct when you wanted to be. It's one of the things I admired about you." "No," I corrected him. "You hated when I was direct. You preferred me uncertain, seeking your approval, deferring to your judgment." He chuckled, shaking his head as if I'd said something charmingly misguided. "That's not true, Maya. I always encouraged your independence." The audacity of the lie momentarily stunned me. "You monitored my text messages. You chose my friends. You decided what I wore, what I ate, where I went. That's not independence." "I was protecting you," he insisted, his voice dropping lower. "The world is dangerous for a young woman alone. You were so naive, so trusting. Someone had to look out for you." I felt a flash of the old anger, hot and bright in my chest. "I didn't need protection. I needed respect. I needed autonomy. I needed a partner, not a warden." His jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. Is that what he gives you? Your new boyfriend? Autonomy? The mention of Julian sent a chill down my spine. I'd been careful not to bring him up, not wanting to give Derek any reason to focus on him. Julian has nothing to do with this conversation, I said firmly. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. Doesn't he? He's the reason you won't give us another chance. No, I said, my voice steady despite the quickening of my pulse. I'm the reason. My growth is the reason. My healing is the reason. The fact that I finally understand what a healthy relationship looks like is the reason. He leaned back, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You've changed. Yes, I agreed. That's what happens when you escape an abusive relationship and spend years rebuilding yourself. The word abusive hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened, then narrowed, his fingers tightening around his cup. Is that what you tell people? That I abused you? I tell people the truth, I said. That I was in a controlling, manipulative relationship that destroyed my sense of self. That I had to flee in the middle of the night to escape. That I spent years looking over my shoulder, afraid you'd find me. And now I have, he said, his voice taking on a dangerous softness. Found you, I mean. After 5 years of wondering what happened, where you went, if you were even alive. Do you have any idea what that was like for me? I met his gaze directly. About the same as it was for me, I imagine, living in fear, constantly vigilant, never knowing when you might appear. He looked genuinely confused. You were afraid of me? Maya, I never laid a hand on you in anger. Never. Not once. Violence isn't just physical, I said quietly. What you did, the isolation, the control, the constant criticism, the emotional manipulation, that was violence too. He shook his head, disbelief etched across his features. This is insane. We had a normal relationship with normal problems. If you were unhappy, you could have said something. We could have worked it out. I did say something, I reminded him. Many times. You just never listened. Or you twisted my words until I doubted my own perceptions. Or you made me feel guilty for even bringing it up. That's not how I remember it, he insisted. I know, I said, surprising myself with the touch of compassion I felt. That's part of the problem. You rewrote our history even as we were living it. You genuinely believe your version of events, don't you? His expression darkened. Don't patronize me, Maya. I know what happened between us. So do I replied. That's why I left. That's why I'm not coming back. And that's why this conversation needs to be our last. For a moment, something flashed across his face. Pain, perhaps, or anger, quickly masked by that practiced control. You really believe all this, don't you? That I'm some kind of monster? Not a monster, I said, surprising myself again with my calm. Just a man who needed control so badly that he was willing to destroy someone else to maintain it. Derek leaned forward, his voice dropping to that intimate register that had once made my heart race with a confused mixture of desire and dread. I never wanted to destroy you, Maya. I wanted to build a life with you. I had plans for us. The lake house, the studio you always wanted, children someday. I had it all mapped out. That's exactly the point, I said. You had it all mapped out. My future, my career, my life, all according to your vision, your timeline, your needs. You never asked what I wanted. I assumed we wanted the same things, he said, a defensive edge creeping into his tone. No, I corrected him. You assumed what I wanted didn't matter as long as I went along with what you wanted. He sat back, studying me with narrowed eyes. And what do you want now, Maya? What great life plan are you fulfilling with your art gallery and your photographer boyfriend? The specificity of the detail, that Julian was a photographer, sent a jolt through me. I'd never mentioned Julian's profession, which meant Derek had been researching him, just as he'd researched me. "My life is not your concern anymore," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Isn't it?" he challenged. "5 years together, and suddenly I'm supposed to pretend you don't exist? That we didn't have plans, promises, a shared future?" "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Move on, just like I have." His smile turned cold. "But you haven't moved on, have you?" "Not really. If you had, you wouldn't have spent 5 years looking over your shoulder. You wouldn't have changed your name from Maya Chen to Maya Winters. You wouldn't have moved across the country and erased every trace of your former life." My blood ran cold. He knew my original name, the one I'd legally changed 3 years ago. How much investigation had he done? How long had he been watching me before making contact? "I did what I needed to do to feel safe," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "To become the person I was meant to be without your influence." "And who is that exactly?" he asked, his tone almost mocking. "This new Maya Winters with her critically acclaimed art and her perfect boyfriend? Is that really you, or just another identity you've created to run from your past?" The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. In the early days after I left, I had wondered the same thing. If my reinvention was authentic or just a reaction against everything Derek had wanted me to be. "I'm more myself now than I ever was with you," I said finally. "With you, I was a reflection of your expectations. Now I'm just me." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker, a vulnerability quickly masked by anger. "You weren't the only one who suffered when you left. Did you ever think about that? Did you ever consider what it did to me coming home to an empty apartment? All your things gone, no note, no explanation, just vanished." For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt, not for leaving, but for the way I'd had to leave. Then, I remembered the fear that had driven me, the certainty that if I'd tried to leave openly, he would have found a way to stop me. "I considered it," I admitted. "But my safety had to come first. After what you did that last month." "What I did?" he interrupted, genuine confusion in his voice. "What are you talking about?" I stared at him, trying to gauge if his confusion was real or just another manipulation. "The tracking app you installed on my phone. The chance encounters with my classmates where you interrogated them about me. The way you started showing up at the studio unannounced, checking my work, questioning who I was talking to." His expression remained bewildered. "I was worried about you. You were distant, secretive. I thought you might be having an affair." The irony was almost laughable. I wasn't having an affair. I was planning my escape. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by a flash of hurt so genuine it momentarily shook my certainty. "So, all that time I thought you were pulling away because you were unhappy with me. You were actually plotting to disappear." "I was unhappy," I corrected him. "Desperately unhappy. Afraid. Constantly walking on eggshells. But whenever I tried to talk to you about it, you turned it around, made it my fault, my misperception, my oversensitivity." He shook his head slowly. "That's not how it was. It is for me," I said firmly. "And my experience is just as valid as yours, even if you don't want to acknowledge it." For a long moment, he was silent, his gaze fixed on his untouched cappuccino. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted to something softer, more vulnerable. "I've changed too, you know," he said quietly. 5 years is a long time. Losing you, it forced me to reevaluate some things. I'd heard variations of this before, the promise of change, the claim of growth and insight. It was part of the cycle. Control, escalation, remorse, promises, temporary improvement, then back to control. I wasn't falling for it again. I'm glad if you've grown, I said, keeping my tone neutral. But it doesn't change anything between us. His expression hardened slightly. You won't even consider the possibility? That I might be different now? That we might be able to start fresh? No, I said simply. I won't. Because of him? Derek asked, nodding slightly in Julian's direction. I didn't turn to look. Wouldn't give away that Julian was here for me. Because of me, I corrected. Because I deserve better than what we had. Because I've built a life I love. A life that has no place for the kind of relationship we had. Derek's jaw tightened. And if I told you I still love you, that I never stopped loving you, that these 5 years have been empty without you? Once, those words would have weakened my resolve, made me question my decision to leave. Now, they just strengthened my certainty that I'd made the right choice. Then I would tell you that love doesn't control. Love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't make you afraid, I said quietly. What you felt for me wasn't love, Derek. It was possession. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. You don't get to tell me what I felt. What I still feel. No, I agreed. But I get to tell you that it doesn't matter anymore. Whatever you felt, whatever you feel now, it's your burden to bear, not mine. For a moment, I saw a flash of the old Derek, the one whose anger simmered just below the surface of his control, ready to erupt at the slightest provocation. Then, with visible effort, he reined it in. So, that's it? He asked, his voice tight. 5 years together, and you won't even consider giving me a second chance? That's it, I confirmed. This conversation is the last connection between us. After today, I don't want any more calls, texts, emails, or surprise visits. I want you to leave Portland and leave me alone. He studied me for a long moment, as if trying to find some crack in my resolve, some opening he could exploit. Finding none. His expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. You know, I almost believe you, he said, his tone shifting to something dismissive. This whole independent artist persona, it's a good act. But we both know the real Maya, the one who needed me to make her decisions, to guide her career, to give her life structure and meaning. That Maya is still in there somewhere underneath all this. Performance. I felt a flicker of the old fear, the old doubt. Then I remembered what Dr. Lambert had told me during a particularly difficult therapy session. When abusers can't control you, they try to control how others see you. And when they can't do that, they try to control how you see yourself. You never knew the real me, I said, rising from my seat. You only knew the version of me you created to fit your needs. I'm not performing independence, Derek. I'm living it. And this conversation is over. He reached out suddenly, grabbing my wrist with enough pressure to make his point without causing a scene. Maya, don't walk away from me. Not again. I looked pointedly at his hand on my wrist, then up at his face. Let go of me, now. For a tense moment, he maintained his grip, challenge in his eyes. Then, as if realizing we were in a public place with witnesses, he released me. This isn't finished, he said, his voice low and controlled despite the anger I could see building behind his eyes. We're not finished. Yes, I said firmly. We are. I turned and walked away, heart pounding but step steady. I didn't look back, didn't acknowledge Julian as he smoothly rose and followed me out a few moments later. Only when we were a block away, safely anonymous in the busy street, did I let myself exhale fully. You okay? Julian asked quietly, falling into step beside me but not touching me, recognizing I might need space. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. I actually am. That night, I slept better than I had since Derek's appearance at my gallery opening. There was a strange peace in finally saying what I'd been holding inside for 5 years, in standing my ground without flinching. For so long, I'd feared confronting him, feared being pulled back into his orbit. But facing him had shown me how far I'd come, how much stronger I was than the frightened girl who'd fled Chicago in the middle of the night. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, painting golden patterns on the wall. Julian was already up. I could hear him moving around in the kitchen, the quiet clink of mugs suggesting coffee was in progress. For a moment, I just lay there, savoring the simple peace of a morning without dread. Then my phone chimed with a text notification. Unknown number. Did you really think it would be that easy? I stared at the screen, my momentary peace shattered. Before I could decide whether to respond or block the number, another text appeared. Unknown number. You can change your name. You can move across the country. You can surround yourself with new people. But you can't erase what we had, what we still have. My hands shook slightly as I blocked the number, set the phone down, and got out of bed. I wouldn't let him pull me back into that cycle of fear and hypervigilance. I had said my piece. I had made my boundaries clear. Now I just had to hold firm. I joined Julian in the kitchen, accepting the mug of coffee he offered with a grateful smile. Any plans today? He asked, leaning against the counter, his own mug cradled in his hands. Studio in the morning, gallery in the afternoon, I said. Determinedly normal. I need to finish the Westlake commission. He nodded, studying me with those perceptive eyes that always seemed to see more than I said. Everything okay? I considered lying, considered protecting him from the knowledge that Derek was still trying to reach me. But one of the promises I'd made to myself after leaving, Derek, was that I would never again hide my truth out of fear. Derek texted, I admitted. New number. I blocked it. Julian's expression remained calm, though I saw the concern in his eyes. What did he say? Just more of the same, I said, unwilling to give Derek's words more power by repeating them. It doesn't matter. I've said everything I needed to say to him. Julian nodded, respecting my choice not to elaborate. If you need anything... I know, I interrupted gently, and I love you for it. But I'm okay, really. And in that moment, despite the text, despite the lingering shadow of Derek's presence, I meant it. I was okay. More than okay. I was strong, centered, certain of my path forward in a way I never could have been while under his influence. The next week passed in a blur of productivity. I finished the Westlake commission ahead of schedule, sold 3 more pieces from the gallery exhibition, and even began sketching ideas for a new series, something about emergence and transformation, inspired partly by my confrontation with Derek. There were no more texts from unknown numbers, no more surprise visits or flower deliveries. According to Zoe, no one matching Derek's description had come by the gallery. It seemed, against all expectations, that he had finally accepted my decision and moved on. I should have known better. It was Friday evening, and I was working late, at my studio. Julian had a client meeting that had run long, so we'd agreed to meet at home rather than him picking me up as he sometimes did. The studio building was quiet, most of the other artists having left for the weekend. I was alone on my floor, lost in the flow of creation, music playing softly through my wireless speaker. I didn't hear the door open, didn't realize anyone had entered until a shadow fell across my canvas. I turned, expecting the building manager or perhaps another artist who'd forgotten something. Instead, I found myself face to face with Derek. "Hello, Maya," he said, his voice eerily calm. "We need to finish our conversation." My brush clattered to the floor, a splash of cobalt blue staining the polished concrete. For a horrifying moment, I was frozen, transported back to Chicago, back to being that frightened girl who measured her words carefully to avoid his displeasure. Then reality reasserted itself. This was my studio, my territory, my life. "How did you get in here?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Derek smiled, that practiced expression that never reached his eyes. "The security in this building is surprisingly lax. The door code hasn't been changed in months. 1479, in case you were wondering." I reached slowly for my phone on the work table, trying to be subtle. "I wouldn't," Derek said softly. "We need to talk. Just us. No interruptions." I left the phone where it was but shifted my position slightly, putting the work table between us. "There's nothing more to say, Derek. I made myself clear at Powell's." He moved further into the studio, his gaze drifting over my paintings, my supplies, the photographs tacked to my inspiration board. Evidence of a life he knew nothing about, a person I'd become without him. "You said your piece," he acknowledged. "But I never got to say mine." "You've had plenty of opportunities," I countered. "The calls, the texts, the emails." He shook his head dismissively. "That's not the same. Those were just opening arguments. I need you to really hear me." Maya. There was something different about him tonight, a strange intensity in his eyes, an unpredictable energy in his movements. During our relationship, I'd learned to read his moods, to sense when the tight control he maintained was slipping. Tonight, something was definitely off. "Are you drunk?" I asked, noticing a slight sway in his stance. He laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet studio. "No, just finally clear-headed. Do you know what it's like, Maya? To spend 5 years searching for someone? 5 years wondering if they're dead or alive? 5 years questioning everything you thought you knew about your relationship?" I said nothing, calculating the distance to the door, assessing whether I could reach it before he could intercept me. "I hired private investigators," he continued, moving to examine a half-finished canvas leaning against the wall. "I checked hospitals, morgues. I thought maybe you'd been in an accident or worse. It never occurred to me that you'd just left, that you'd erased yourself so completely." "I had to," I said quietly. He turned to me, something dangerous flashing in his eyes. "No, you didn't. You could have talked to me. You could have told me you were unhappy. We could have fixed things." "I tried," I reminded him. "Many times. You never listened." He waved this away impatiently. "You were always so dramatic, making mountains out of molehills. We had normal relationship problems, nothing that warranted disappearing in the middle of the night." The familiar pattern of dismissal and gaslighting was so transparent now, so obvious in its manipulation. Once it would have made me doubt my own perceptions, my own memories. Now it just strengthened my resolve. "This conversation is pointless," I said, straightening my spine, claiming my space. "You need to leave. Now." Derek's expression hardened. "Or what? You'll call your boyfriend? Have him come rescue you?" I met his gaze steadily. "I don't need rescuing. I just need you to respect my boundaries and leave my studio." He laughed again, that same harsh sound. Boundaries. The favorite word of therapists everywhere. Did your therapist tell you that? Dr. Lambert, isn't it? The one with the office on Hawthorne Boulevard? A chill ran down my spine. He knew my therapist's name, her office location. How long had he been watching me? How much did he know about my life? "You've been stalking me," I said, the realization settling like ice in my stomach. He looked offended. "Stalking? No, Maya. I've been trying to understand what happened to us, trying to find answers." "By following me? Researching my therapist? Tracking my movements?" He shrugged, unapologetic. "You left me no choice. You disappeared without a trace." What was I supposed to do? Move on, I said simply. Like normal. People do after a breakup. His expression darkened. We didn't break up. You vanished. There's a difference. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. Derek, I'm going to say this one more time. You need to leave, now, or I'm calling the police. For a moment, he looked genuinely surprised, as if the idea that I might involve authorities had never occurred to him. Then his expression settled into something colder, more calculated. And tell them what? That your ex-boyfriend came to talk. To you? That's not a crime, Maya. Stalking is, I countered. So is breaking and entering. He waved dismissively around the studio. I didn't break anything. The door was unlocked. And as for stalking, good luck proving that. It would be your word against mine. And we both know who's more credible in the eyes of the system, a successful attorney with an impeccable reputation, or an unstable artist with a history of, let's call them, emotional issues. The implied threat was clear. If I involved the police, he would paint me as mentally unstable, just as he'd done during our relationship whenever I challenged his version of reality. But I wasn't that easily intimidated anymore. My emotional issues, as you call them, were well documented by Dr. Lambert, as was the source of them. You, I said, reaching slowly for my phone again. And I'm pretty sure the gallery's security cameras caught you entering the building without authorization. So again, I'm asking you to leave. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Derek's facade of control slipped further, anger flashing across his features. You think I'm making this ugly? You're the one who ran away. You're the one who's been hiding for 5 years. You're the one who refused to give me closure. Closure isn't something other people give you, I said, my finger hovering over the emergency call button on my phone's screen. It's something you find for yourself. He moved suddenly, crossing the space between us faster than I anticipated, knocking the phone from my hand. It skidded across the concrete floor, coming to rest beneath a storage rack. I loved you, he said, his voice low and intense. I gave you everything. A home, stability, direction, and you threw it all away. I backed up, putting distance between us again, my heart pounding. That's not love, Derek. That's control. There's a difference. Is that what your new boyfriend taught you? He demanded, following my retreat step for step. That I was controlling? That I was abusive? Did he turn you against me? No, I said firmly. You did that all by yourself. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. He's not right for you, you know. Julian Wright, photographer, 34, specializing in architectural and landscape photography, former photojournalist until an incident in Syria sent him home with a case of PTSD and a drinking problem he claims to have overcome. The detailed knowledge of Julian's past sent a fresh wave of fear through me. Derek hadn't just been researching me, he'd been investigating Julian, too. Stay away from him, I warned, anger beginning to overtake fear. Derek smiled, seeing he'd found a pressure point. Touched a nerve, have I? Is he your white knight, Maya? Your rescuer? Does he make you feel safe? He makes me feel respected, I corrected. Something you never did. Derek's smile vanished. I respected you. I saw your potential when you couldn't see it yourself. I pushed you to be better. You pushed me to be what you wanted, I countered. Not who I actually was. He gestured around the studio, at my paintings, my work, and look at you now, successful artist, gallery exhibitions, critical acclaim. You became exactly what I always said you could be. No, I said, a strange calm settling over me as I recognized the fundamental flaw in his logic. I became what I was always capable of becoming once I got away from you. My success isn't because of you, Derek. It's despite you. His expression contorted with anger. You ungrateful— I'm not going to stand here and be insulted in my own studio, I interrupted, a newfound strength in my voice. You need to leave. Now. This is your last warning. For a tense moment, he didn't move, his body rigid with barely contained rage. Then, with visible effort, he regained some semblance of control. Fine, he said, his voice eerily calm again. I'll go. But this conversation isn't over, Maya. We have unfinished business, you and I. And I'm not leaving Portland until it's resolved. He turned and walked toward the door, his movements precise and deliberate. At the threshold, he paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You think you've rebuilt yourself, created this new identity, this new life. But you're still running, Maya, still hiding. And you can't hide forever. Then he was gone, the door closing. Behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded more ominous than if he'd slammed it. I stood frozen for several minutes, listening to his footsteps recede down the hallway, waiting until I heard the distant sound of the building's exterior door. Only then did I retrieve my phone from under the storage rack and call Julian. He answered on the first ring. Hey, I'm just finishing up. Should be home in 20? Derek was here, I interrupted, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. At the studio. He just left. Julian's tone changed instantly. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? I'm fine, I assured him. Just shaken. He knew things, Julian. About me, about you. He's been watching us. I'm coming to get you, Julian said, and I could hear him already moving, the background noise changing as he left wherever he'd been. Stay on the phone with me. Is the door locked? I crossed to the studio door, checking the lock. It is now. But he knew the building code. He could come back. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Julian promised. Just stay on the line. True to his word, Julian arrived in record time, slightly out of breath as if he'd run part of the way. The relief I felt at seeing him was overwhelming, not because I needed rescuing, but because with him, I didn't have to be strong alone. He enfolded me in his arms, and I allowed myself a moment of vulnerability, pressing my face against his chest, drawing comfort from his steady heartbeat. Let's get you home, he said softly. No, I replied, pulling back to look at him. I need to finish the Westlake piece. It's due Monday. Julian looked concerned. Maya, after what just happened. I'm not letting him disrupt my life, I said firmly. Not again. Not ever. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded, understanding. Okay, then I'll stay with you while you work. And so he did, settling. Quietly in the corner with his laptop, editing photos while I painted, his presence a comforting anchor in the space Derek had violated. By the time we left 3 hours later, the Westlake Commission was complete, and I felt steadier, more in control. But as we walked to Julian's car, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the prickling sensation between my shoulder blades that had become all too familiar over the past week. We need to do something, I said as Julian drove us home, the city lights blurring past the windows. He's not going to stop. Julian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Have you considered a restraining order? I sighed, leaning my head against the cool glass of the window. On what grounds? He hasn't technically threatened me, and as he pointed out, it would be my word against his. He's a corporate attorney, with connections. I'm a successful artist with a documented history of his abuse, Julian finished for me. Don't let him make you doubt yourself, Maya. That's what he wants. I nodded, knowing he was right. I'll call Dr. Lambert tomorrow. She can help me navigate the legal options. When we arrived home, Julian did a thorough check of the apartment while I waited in the car, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid. A week ago, but now felt necessary. Once he confirmed all was clear, we went inside together, locking the door and drawing the blinds. "We should change the locks," Julian said, checking the windows. "Just to be safe." I nodded, sinking onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "First thing tomorrow." He sat beside me, not touching until I leaned into him, seeking his warmth, his steadiness. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I looked up at him, confused. "For what?" "That you have to go through this. That he found you after all this time." I shook my head. "It's not your fault." "I know," he said, "but I still hate seeing you afraid in your own space." I considered this, realizing something important. I'm not afraid exactly. I'm angry and cautious, but not afraid. Not like before. That's progress, I think. Julian smiled, pressing a kiss to my temple. Enormous progress. That night, I slept fitfully, waking at every small sound, my subconscious on high alert despite my conscious determination not to let Derek's reappearance control my life. Julian slept lightly too, his body positioned between me and the door even in sleep, a protective gesture that made my heart ache with gratitude. The next morning, we called a locksmith who came promptly to change the locks on our apartment door. Julian also installed a small security camera above the entryway, a precaution that made me feel both safer and somehow defeated, as if Derek had already won by making us modify our lives around his intrusion. "It's not giving in," Julian assured me, seeming to read my thoughts as he finished setting up the camera. "It's being smart. There's a difference." I nodded, appreciating his understanding without me having to articulate my conflicted feelings. That was one of the countless ways Julian differed from Derek. He didn't require me to explain or justify every emotion, didn't make me feel irrational for having complex reactions to difficult situations. Dr. Lambert squeezed me in for an emergency session that afternoon, her calm, practical approach helping to ground me as I recounted Derek's appearance at my studio. "You handled it remarkably well," she observed when I'd finished. "You maintained your boundaries, you didn't engage with his attempts to manipulate you, and you prioritized your safety. Those are all significant achievements, Maya." I smiled faintly, appreciating her validation but still feeling unsettled. "But he's still out there, still watching me, still convinced he can pull me back into his orbit." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, and that's not something you can control. What you can control is your response to his attempts." "I've been thinking about a restraining order," I admitted, "but I'm worried it won't be enough, that it might even escalate things." Dr. Lambert didn't immediately dismiss my concern, which I appreciated. "That's a valid consideration. Restraining orders can be very effective in some cases, less so in others. In your situation, given Derek's resources and apparent fixation, it might be just one part of a larger safety plan." We spent the rest of the session developing that plan, practical, steps I could take to protect myself while still living my life. By the time I left her office, I felt more centered, more prepared, less reactive to the situation. The rest of the weekend passed without incident. No more surprise visits, no more texts from unknown numbers. By Monday morning, I was cautiously optimistic that perhaps Derek had finally gotten the message, that maybe he'd return to Chicago and his corporate law practice, leaving me to my rebuilt life. I should have known better. I arrived at the gallery early Monday morning, coffee in hand, ready to install the Westlake Commission in preparation for the client's arrival that afternoon. Zoe wasn't due in until 10, so I had the gallery to myself. For a couple of hours, time I planned to use setting up the new piece and rearranging some of the existing work. The gallery was quiet, morning light streaming through the front windows, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. I moved through the space with practiced efficiency, adjusting lighting, measuring wall space, planning the optimal arrangement for the new work. I was so absorbed in my task that I didn't hear the front door open, didn't realize anyone had entered until a voice broke the silence. It really is exceptional work. I whirled around to find Derek standing just inside the entrance, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable as he studied the large canvas I'd just unwrapped. "How did you get in?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "The gallery doesn't open for another hour." He held up a key, dangling it between his fingers. Amazing what people will do for a man in a suit who claims to be a building inspector. Your landlord was very accommodating. I sat down, the measuring tape I'd been holding, putting the reception desk between us. "I'm calling the police." "I wouldn't," Derek said calmly. "Not until you hear what I have to say." "I've heard enough," I replied, reaching for my phone. "I'm leaving Portland," he announced, stopping me mid-motion. "Today. My flight back to Chicago departs at 2 p.m. I studied him warily, not trusting this sudden capitulation. "Good." He smiled faintly. "But before I go, I wanted to give you something. A parting gift, if you will." He reached into his suit jacket, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might pull out a weapon. Instead, he extracted a thick envelope and placed it on the reception desk between us. "What is this?" I asked, not touching it. "The future you could have had," he said simply. "The future you threw away when you left." I made no move to open the envelope, my suspicion evident in my expression. Derek sighed, reaching forward to flip it open himself, revealing a stack of glossy photographs. "The lake house," he explained as I reluctantly glanced at the top image, a stunning modern home perched on the edge of what appeared to be a large, pristine lake. "I bought it 3 years ago. It has that north-facing studio space you always wanted, 3,000 square feet of it, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water." He flipped to the next photo, the interior of what was indeed a magnificent studio space, flooded with natural light, more expansive than any artist could reasonably need. "This could have been yours," he continued, his voice taking on that hypnotic quality he used when trying to persuade. "All of it. The house, the studio, the life we planned together. It's still not too late, Maya." I looked up from the photos to meet his gaze. "Yes, it is." His expression hardened slightly. "You haven't even looked at everything." "I don't need to," I said firmly. "It doesn't matter how beautiful the house is, how perfect the studio. I wouldn't trade my freedom for a gilded cage." He laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Freedom. You keep using that word. Is that what you call this?" He gestured around the gallery, considerably smaller and less impressive than the studio in his photographs. "Working for someone else? Living in a cramped apartment? Scraping by on commission sales?" "I'm not scraping by," I corrected him. "I'm thriving, on my own terms, creating my own work, living my own life. And yes, that's exactly what I call freedom." Derek's smile was cold. "For now. But what happens when the art market shifts? When your style falls out of favor? When you're no longer the fresh new talent everyone's talking about? What then, Maya?" "Then I'll adapt," I said simply. "I'll grow. I'll evolve. That's what artists do." He shook his head as if I were being naive. "It's a precarious existence. One bad review, one failed exhibition, and it could all disappear. With me, you'd never have to worry about any of that. You could create whatever you wanted, without the pressure of sales or critics or market trends." For the briefest moment, I allowed myself to imagine it. The security, the stability, the freedom from financial concerns. The magnificent studio overlooking the lake, endless supplies, unlimited time to create. Then I remembered the cost. My autonomy, my identity, my peace of mind. My soul, piece by piece, day by day, until there was nothing left of the real me. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. Not at any price. Derek's expression shifted, the mask of reasonableness slipping to reveal the anger beneath. You're a fool, Maya. You always were. Too stubborn to see what was good for you, too proud to accept help, too convinced of your own rightness to consider other perspectives. I smiled, recognizing the familiar pattern of his manipulation. When charm failed, try insults. When insults failed, try threats. If I'm such a fool, I said calmly, why are you so desperate to get me back? The question seemed to catch him, off guard. For a moment he looked genuinely confused, as if he'd never considered it from that angle. Because I love you, he said finally, but the words sounded hollow, rehearsed, lacking the conviction of genuine emotion. No, I corrected. Gently. You love the idea of me, the version of me you created in your mind. The woman who needed you, depended on you, reflected your importance back to you. But that woman doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. Derek's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. You don't get to tell me what I feel. And you don't get to tell me who I am, I countered. Not anymore. We stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of 5 years and all that had changed between us hanging in the air. Finally, Derek gathered the photographs, slipping them back into the envelope. I truly hope you don't come to regret this decision, he said, his voice cold. When the novelty of your independence wears off, when the reality of struggling as an artist in a saturated market sets in, when your photographer boyfriend realizes he wants someone less complicated, remember that I offered you everything, and you chose nothing. I shook my head, a strange calm settling over me as I recognized the fundamental flaw in his understanding. That's where you're wrong, Derek. I didn't choose nothing. I chose myself, and that's everything. Something shifted in his expression, not quite acceptance, but perhaps the first glimmer of understanding that he had truly lost, that the woman standing before him was beyond his reach, beyond his control. Goodbye, Maya, he said finally, turning toward the door. I won't be contacting you again. I said nothing, watching as he walked out of the gallery, and, I hoped, out of my life. For good. Only when the door closed behind him did I release the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I stood there for a long moment, processing what had just happened, the finality of it. Then I moved to the front door, locking it, even though the gallery would open to the public in less than an hour. I needed these few minutes of privacy, of safety, to recenter myself. My phone chimed with a text message from Julian. Coffee shop was packed, running a few minutes late. Everything okay? I smiled, typing back. Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I'll tell you when you get here. And I meant it. Despite the intrusion, despite the manipulation and the implied threats, I felt lighter, more certain of my path than I had in years. Derek had played his final card, the promise of material security, creative freedom, the life he thought I should want, and I had refused it without hesitation. In that refusal was a kind of power I had never fully claimed before, a declaration of self-worth that no one, not even Derek with all his resources and determination, could take from me. As I returned to preparing the gallery for the day ahead, I glanced at my reflection in one of the large windows, the woman I had become staring back at me with clear eyes and a straight spine. Not a victim, not a survivor, but a creator. Of art, of life, of self. The woman Derek had stalked for 5 years, the woman he had finally found, was indeed someone he never expected. She was me, whole and undiminished, standing in the light of my own making. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't Forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.